Welcome to Week 6's Multimedia Assignment, History 705. I'm Dan Flanagan. The battle that was to be the last fight in the War of 1812 was fought after the treaty of official end of the war was signed. It's late, 1814, and diplomats from the United States and Great Britain are meeting in Ghent, Belgium to discuss the end of the war that we know as the War of 1812. As news of the failures of the British at Baltimore and General Jackson's campaign in Florida reached these diplomats, the British were at a disadvantage. The Americans wanted, quote, status quo ante bello, unquote, but the British wanted more. However, this was not to be, but the main cause of the war, including impressment, that is, the taking of American sailors for service into the British Royal Navy, wasn't addressed. This was because the Napoleonic War was over, and the sailors were no longer needed to fill the ranks of the British Navy. The treaty itself was signed on Christmas Eve, 1814, but news of the signings would not reach the North American continent for weeks. However, on the North American continent, General Jackson had intel that the British wanted to invade New Orleans. So he travels west along the Gulf Coast and defends Mobile in the present state of Alabama and kicks the British out of Spanish-held Pensacola. Then he receives a letter from the governor of a barely estate, Louisiana, that reads in part, quote, I am not at the head of a united and willing people. Native Americans, native Frenchmen, and some Englishmen, and there exists much jealousy, unquote. They, that is Jackson, makes it the Big Easy on 1 December 1814. And with his mere arrival in New Orleans, they celebrate. Now there is a strange addition to Jackson's army, John Lafitte's pirates. Initially, Jackson wants nothing to do with them, calling them hellish banditti. He tells his army that they procured from them 7,500 flints that made ready pistols and muskets, without which the country would have certainly fallen. So the men under the pirate leader, Jean Lafitte, ditched the black flag for his stars and stripes. But they want a price. It's the pardons. And given the current need, the pardons were gladly given by General Jackson. And while all this is going on, British Admiral Cochrane readies his troops in Jamaica. At his last foray into battle, which was the Battle of Baltimore, which failed at Fort McHenry, all the while losing his partner, General Robert Ross, who paid the ultimate price for the battle itself. However, word of an attack is soon reported in both British and American newspapers. Jackson spreads his troops all around the approaches to New Orleans. The British, being seasoned troops from the recently ended Napoleonic Wars, Cochrane lands his ships on December 18, 1814, and after a little recon, Cochrane decides that the best way to attack is via Lake Borgne. If Cochrane can take control of Lake Borgne, his British troops could land just a mere 15 miles from the city itself. The only thing in their way is a small flotilla of American boats, commanded by Lieutenant Tom Ap Casby Jones, better known as Tack Jones. Jones knows that this modern David versus Goliath situation has two vessels with one gun each, has the USS Alligator and the USS Seahorse, and 5 Jefferson-style gunboats. They are described as small and not well defended. Across these vessels, he has a total of 23 guns and 182 men. All he could really hope for was delaying action. Cochrane sends launches filled with Royal Marines at Tack Jones's force. They hold their own with the aid of shore batteries against the British. However, on December 16th, there's a terrific battle in the lake between the Americans and the British, which the Americans are finally overtaken and now lend forces that conduct operations against Jackson's men. They soon land on what is today Pearl Island, located to the northern side of Lake Borgne. Then they land just south of the city at the Villeray Plantation. Under the command of General John Keane, the British are now only 8 miles from the city. Gabriel Villeray escapes the British and rushes to inform the American forces that the location of the British main forces. Jackson consolidates his forces that number roughly 2,100 at the Chalmette Plantation. This stands between New Orleans and the British. The American offensive starts at 7:30 p.m. The British are surprised to see a ship on the nearby Mississippi River. The British hail the vessel but get no response. The ship itself drops anchor and turns its broadsides to the British, and this is when the ship in question is finally identified. It is the USS Carolina with its 14 guns and opens fire on the British. Many British become casualties. The American ground forces attack but call it off around 4 a.m. the next morning. The British suffer around 275 casualties, but more important, the British has lost the element of surprise. In response, Jackson falls back to Canal Rodriguez. This canal runs from the Mississippi River in the west all the way to the bayous and cypress swamps in the east. And the British have but one way to go. Jackson decides that this is the perfect place to set up defenses. Canal Rodriguez is now called Line Jackson. While this is going on, a new British commander shows up to take command of the ground forces. General Edward Pakenham, sent to replace General Ross, who I remind you was lost at the Battle of Fort McHenry, arrives on Christmas Day, and he inherits a mess. Pakenham needs to address the ship in the river first. He has his artillery fire some hot shot, that is, cannonballs heated to start fires. And with a little luck, a round lands just out of reach of the Carolina's crew, starting a fire in the powder magazine. In minutes, the Carolina is lost. Now Pakenham can do some reconnaissance. He tries to do this on 28 December, and this turns into a small battle itself. That is when the British get a close look at Line Jackson, and they see that is a moat in the model of a British castle. Surprising to the British is also another ship, this one called the USS Louisiana. This one opens fire on the British along with the Americans at Line Jackson. While the British recon, they learn where the line is weakest. But so does Jackson. He extends and reinforces his lines further into the swamp and bayou. A few days later, on Christmas Eve, 1815, Pakenham decides that he will try an artillery attack while the Americans are celebrating the New Year. But just seem to be having an off day. They consistently miss their targets. The Americans, for their part, quickly ditch the festivities and return fire. This is important as the battle only ends when the British run out of ammunition and have to wait for supplies and reinforcements, and this takes about a week. They try again on 8 January 1815. The British have somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 troops. Jackson only has around 4,500 men to defend New Orleans. But they are a motley crew of African descent French, Kentucky, and Tennessee militia, and former pirates. Jackson clearly has his work cut out for him. The fortifications make up for the disparity of troops. The British plan is to ferry troops across the river at night in order to capture an American battery on the other side of the river, at what is known as Line Jordan. They will then turn those guns on the Americans on the west, thus forcing Jackson to defend from two sides. This they should do before dawn on the 8th. And Pakenham will conduct a frontal assault on the American lines, thus opening the way to New Orleans. However, nothing goes right from the start. British cannot get their boats into the water as British engineers did not dig the launch deep enough. They are stuck dragging their boats over land into the river for hours, way behind schedule. Why not just stop the attack? Well, this is because in early 19th century, communications are such that giving orders after the attack has launched is an impossibility. So, the attack goes forward. Early in the morning, Americans open artillery barrage on the British, who are in the open and waiting for orders to advance. And as the British forces move forward, the American muskets join the fray. The British reach Line Jackson and are cut down in droves. The slaughter lasts for about 2 hours, and the British lose roughly 1,800 men. But they include General Pakenham. The Americans lose just 71. While this battle has no effect on the outcome of the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson comes out of it a hero and will ride the wave to the presidency in 1828. Jackson would go on to fight an unfamiliar foe while in office, including petticoats, banks, and even his own vice president, John C. Calhoun. As an issue known as nullification split his relationship with his vice president. But probably the most controversial of all was Jackson's decision and his dealing with the Indian Removal Act.